Dick Durbin in the Senate used to be a big backer of Israel. He still is, but now thinks there ought to be a ceasefire after the hostages come home. Good luck with that, Senator Durbin. Unfortunately for Israel, there is now the first senator coming out in public and supporting the words of President Biden. Dick Durbin, the senator from Illinois, has just become the first U.S. senator to express support for a ceasefire in Gaza. And he says, and there must be a release of all the hostages. He said, unlike the other 18 members of the Democrat caucus who in the last couple of days signed a ceasefire petition without even mentioning releasing the hostages, this basically surrender to Hamas. He said he wants to sign a ceasefire petition, but we should let the hostages out. There's no government in the world that would put up with this. And Dick Durbin expects the United States to. I mean, he's a moderate Democrat. He's not a squad member. He's not one of these maniacs like Rashida Tlaib and AOC and the rest of them that are Ayanna Pressley, that are completely crazy. You know, Bowman pulling the fire alarm and
Fire Marshal Bowman.
Exactly. These guys are nuts. Durbin is moderate, but he wants a ceasefire too. None of these people have any relationship to the sane world when they look at Gaza and think somehow it should be okay to surrender when there's 230 Israelis and God knows how many hundreds of other hostages. I find their pressure on Israel to be completely despicable, beyond words. Okay.
You know what, Barry? Yeah, I'm so with you on that. It is, again, these people, they're advocating and they're making a pathway for these evil people. They're making a pathway for Hamas. And then they try to come across like they're being civil about all of this, Barry. Let me ask you, Barry, do you know why the United Nations and these Democrats are not asking for Hamas to do a ceasefire? Why are they, or are they? Are they asking for Hamas to do a ceasefire, or are they just asking Israel to do a ceasefire?
As far as I know, it's both parties to stop fighting, but Hamas doesn't even participate in that stuff. So that's just silliness, truthfully.
Right. So it just comes back to asking Israel to do a ceasefire. So they're trying to put pressure on Israel to do a ceasefire. The same thing at the United Nations. United Nations, they voted for who to have a ceasefire. Did they vote for Hamas to have a ceasefire, or did they vote for Israel to have a ceasefire? And the reason why I say that, because Palestine is not a recognized state by the United Nations. So who would they ask to do a ceasefire as a state? They can't.
I don't even know. That's an interesting concept that I don't know the answer to. I really don't.
I mean, because I was sitting there thinking about that. They're not even the actual state. United Nations don't recognize them as a state, so they can't go to their state representative. They can't go to the prime minister, what have you, and say, "Hey, we're asking your state to do a ceasefire." There's no one for them to talk to because they're not even recognized in the United Nations. The anti-Israel United Nations don't even recognize Palestine as a state, but yet they go and target Israel, telling Israel to stop, do a ceasefire, which doesn't make any sense.
I totally agree with you. And the irony is that nobody mentions what you're mentioning right now.
I mean, yeah, I'm like, why?
It's true.
Because I wouldn't ask Barry. I went and looked it up. I said, let me just go, because I've heard this before. I said, let me go just make sure. Let me go look it up. I'm going to go to Google, all knowing Google, leftist Google. And even Google directed me to the United Nations, and the Palestine state is not even on the charter of the United Nations. So the United Nations, again, they can't even ask Palestine to do a ceasefire because it doesn't exist in their eyes. But they can target Israel.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I haven't heard anything from Hamas responding to the demand by the United Nations for a ceasefire.
I mean, I'm like, Will Johnson can't be the only one thinking about this. Come on, man. I can't be the only one.
I think you're the only one that's noticed. It's weird.
But
I
how
mean,
was that I'm like, I guess maybe because I do a lot of thinking about all this stuff. And I'm just looking at it. And I'm like, wait a minute. But you start putting two and two together and you start, wait a minute. It's
you
not a
know,
state.
I'm not going to argue with you. What you're saying makes total sense. I don't know. There's so much that's just inexplicable, Will, that doesn't make sense to me to sit here and have a rational discussion with you, that one group invades another country, slaughters several thousand, takes hostages, does the most brutal stuff possible, right? And as a result of that brutality, the country that got invaded strikes back, rightly so. And as a result, the world now wants the attacked country to back down. Absolutely unconscionable and, for me, inexplicable.